This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by Turtles All the Way Down, the new novel from John Green, author of The Fault in Our Stars. Turtles All the Way Down is about one girl's struggle with anxiety and the ripple effect it has on others. Read the first 2 chapters now over at turtlesallthewaydownbook.com.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 277 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new science fiction film Blade Runner 2049. And this will involve spoilers for everything in the movie, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Daniel H. Wilson, who you may remember from our feature interview back in episode 41, our panel on robot uprisings back in episode 107, and our panel on video games and books and movies back in episode 163. He holds a PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon University, and his New York Times bestselling novel Robopocalypse is currently being adapted for film by Steven Spielberg. His latest novel, The Clockwork Dynasty, is out now. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Then next up, we've got Sara Lynn Michener, who you may remember from our panel on Star Trek Beyond back in episode 214, and our panel on The Handmaid's Tale back in episode 263. She's a Ravenclaw Trekkie maker feminist who writes at Medium and crafts laser-cut jewelry and soap with swear words inside. She lives in Northern California with a Renaissance engineer, a dog, and a bird. So Sarah, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us today is Matthew Kressel, who you may remember from our panel on Jewish science fiction back in episode 172. He's the author of the novel King of Shards, and his short stories The Sounds of Old Earth and The Meeker and the All-Seeing Eye were both nominated for the Nebula Award. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly fantastic fiction reading series at the KGB Bar in New York, and you should all go check out his recent Tor.com article, Why Blade Runner is More Relevant Than Ever. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And today's show is brought to you by Turtles All the Way Down, the new novel by #1 best-selling author John Green, who you may know from his mega-popular YouTube channel Vlogbrothers, which he created with his brother Hank Green, and from his online educational series Crash Course. He's been listed by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, has twice been a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, and has also received such accolades as the Prince Medal and the Edgar Award. And here's a description of the book. It says, 16-year-old Asa never intended to pursue the mystery of fugitive billionaire Russell Pickett, but there's a $100,000 reward at stake, and her best and most fearless friend, Daisy, is eager to investigate. So together they navigate the short distance and broad divides that separate them from Russell Pickett's son, Davis. Asa is trying. She's trying to be a good daughter, a good friend, a good student, and maybe even a good detective, while also living within the ever-tightening spiral of her own thoughts. In his long-awaited return, John Green, the acclaimed, award-winning author of Looking for Alaska and The Fault in Our Stars, shares Asa's story with shattering, unflinching clarity in this brilliant novel of love, resilience, and the power of lifelong friendship. So again, the book is called Turtles All the Way Down, and you can read the first 2 chapters now over at turtlesallthewaydownbook.com. All right, so now let's get to our panel. Okay, so I want to start to talk to Matt, because Matt, you are the biggest Blade Runner fan that I know. And I have personally witnessed you, don't you watch Blade Runner every New Year's Eve at midnight and you kind of quote the movie as you're watching it?
I do, and actually I think this may have been the first year where I didn't do that. It was sort of my party trick, and as you can imagine, after a night of drinking, sometimes my quotes get a little bit less accurate as the night goes on. But that is something that I do.
You're just like fears in the Tane.
Yeah, exactly.
But so tell us, why do you love Blade Runner so much?
I think for me, it's that each time I watch it, I uncover a new layer or a new piece of the film that I may not have quite considered before. For me, Blade Runner feels like kind of a Rorschach test, and I think that's why so many people react in the way they do to the film, is that the film doesn't provide easy answers. There's just so much layering there that everyone comes out of it with their own experience. And I've noticed that when I watch it, my interpretation of the film changes depending on my own mood as well. So I just feel like there's so much there. And I also, what the common answer is that the themes that it explores, the themes of what it means to be human, what our definition of such, and, whether or not our memories make us, things like that. Also, like, it had such an incredible visual appeal to me, especially at a young age, that before I really even understood the themes, I was just kind of mesmerized by it. I remember very vividly remembering the scene where Deckard gives the Voight Kampf to Rachel before I really even knew that I saw it for the first time. I think it was on like HBO. I did not see it in the theater, and just that scene just stuck in my head. And yeah, it's such a, because I've watched it so many times, I feel like every time I watch Blade Runner, it sort of takes me back to every time I've watched it. So it's almost like a nostalgia for me as well.
Well, yeah, I had a very similar experience because I saw the movie when I was a real little kid. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but then I remembered the scene, kind of the same kind of idea you're talking about, where Rachel says that, she doesn't believe that she's a replicant, and she talks about these things that she can remember, and and discovers that, is told that they were implanted in her head and they're other people's memories. And, and that, I don't think anything has ever blown my mind so much as being a kid and watching that. And for a long time, I sort of forgot what movie it had been. I just remembered this scene. I was like, wow, that was such a great scene. I wonder what movie that was from. And then later I watched Blade Runner again. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the thing with the memory and the spiders and everything.
It was your own wooden horse.
Yes. It was also the cat, the meowing of the cat when Deckard is going into the Bradbury building. That just haunted me for years. And I was like, oh man, like every time I heard that, it just took me right back there.
Yeah. Well, how about, so Sarah, what do you think about what Matt's saying here about how awesome Blade Runner is?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sort of exemplifies why people like science fiction and why science fiction is different from, anything else that we have in the, in fiction. That, we have this thing that's really not been around too long. I mean, it's, something from the days of Mary Shelley. And that's why the same themes keep popping up, and probably why, Ridley Scott is so obsessed with Prometheus. But, so, it's a wonderful story to sort of say, this is why science fiction is so great. And there are so many tie-ins to, the modern world of, when the original came out, the modern world now, which unfortunately the world hasn't changed that much. And, we still are having the same issues, and slavery exists, sexual slavery exists, that kind of thing. And so, to have something that, science fiction is at its best when it, talks about stuff that's happening now in the world, or that has happened in the world. And Blade Runner has always done a great job of doing that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because just earlier today on Twitter, I saw someone post a thing and it said, if you're under the age of 60, you were never promised a flying car. You were promised a cyberpunk dystopian hellscape, and here you go.
That's right. Very right. Accurate.
How about Daniel? Sort of, what is your background with Blade Runner?
Yeah, I have to say that there don't really seem to be many robots in Blade Runner to me. They never felt like robots. They felt like people. Everything was so realistic that when I watched it as a kid, it never grabbed me as science fiction beyond the fact that, it was dark and brooding. There were flying cars. So, I appreciate Blade Runner aesthetically. I appreciate it as a work of art. Like, intellectually, it really grabs me, but it's like work, like I really got to sit and like think about it and focus on it. So as entertainment, it's never what I pop in to like, just watch a bunch of people kick ass and rush around and get a lot of plot. So, and then also having, really liked the original Philip K. Dick story, it kind of, that always felt like very different. And so I don't know, I'm not, you can put me on the other end of the spectrum of Matt. So maybe we'll have a more balanced, discussion about it because, I love robots and robotics and science fiction predominantly that's what I'm really into. And this never, although they examine all these themes, they never really cut them open. It was more like, it's always felt more like Battlestar Galactica to me, in that these are just people that other people call robots. And it's really tough for me to distinguish, what the difference is. But in terms of, perpetuating all the awesome Philip K. Dick themes that I love, like, just not believing, everything's so trippy, not believing whether this is real, not knowing whether you're really human, making you question reality. I mean, it does all that so perfectly that I think it really encapsulates a lot of his work and is just a great messenger for that, to the world. I'm interested to discuss it because, it never grabbed me emotionally as much as it grabbed me intellectually.
That's interesting, Dan, because Blade Runner is, I would definitely say, one of my favorite movies. But I would say that it is not a difficult movie to fall asleep during. And it is, you have the feeling that not all the parts really are consistent with each other, or, as I think is the case, that the different people making the movie weren't all on the same page about what was going on where. Matt, what do you think about that?
I've heard Blade Runner called like the $55 million art film. It's basically this slow, brooding. It is very intellectual, but at the same time, I think what's powerful for me, I kind of disagree that there isn't really an emotional pull to it. I think it's just that it requires you to work, and I think that I know we're going to talk about the new film in a little while, but like I heard it's not doing as well as they predicted, and I think part of it is that the viewer has to do work. You go into a lot of films today, and it's like everything is presented for you. Here's plot point A, here's plot point B, here's plot point C. Blade Runner, the original and the follow-up, don't do that, or do that in a way that forces you to put the pieces together yourself. So I find that really rewarding. I find that when I find those pieces, and especially not like the overt stuff, but the stuff that's sort of sprinkled throughout in the background, the double entendre that somebody says, actually adds impact and meaning to me. And I find the movie incredibly emotional, especially with the culmination of the scene with Batty on the roof. To me, it's just one of the greatest all-time shots.
You know what I felt like when Batty says that line, when he says, "I've seen, attack ships off the shoulder of Orion." I think I want to go see that fucking movie. I want to go see robots fighting fucking an Orion. Like, what? They're in spaceships? They're like having laser battles?
Oh, yeah.
Let's go see that. What?
Did you see
on a roof somewhere? It's raining.
Did you see any of the short films? There's the one by the producer of Cowboy Bebop, and there's like a flashback scene where you kind of see a battle, but it's very blurry. And I think actually they were supposed to shoot an off-world scene in the original film of Batty and the other replicants escaping. So you would have seen at least part of the off-world. But
that's actually what blows me away about the original Blade Runner, is that it has that level of complexity. Because if you look at most of the adaptations of Philip K. Dick's stuff, what happens is there's some kind of really rad high concept, and then they establish the high concept in the first couple of minutes of the film. And then the rest of the film explores the high concept, which is so cool, and it's usually a lot of action. So, like, you think of Looper. Well, like, a guy gets blown away in a field within 5 seconds, and then through VO, you realize, oh, this is cool. And then, like, Minority Report, and they're like, they go solve a crime before it happens. Like, you get the high concept. It's in, like, this cold open with a lot of action, and it's really, it really grabs you and you run with it. And they're not really like this movie. They're not really like, Blade Runner, in that they're all still great movies, which is kind of amazing, the track record on Philip K. Dick movies.
Wait, point of order. Is Looper a PKD?
I don't think it is. I know, Total Recall, Minority Report, right. Scanner Darkly. I don't think Looper is.
Okay, whoops. Yeah. But you see what I mean? Like, in a lot of those, he's got a cool high concept that's sort of conveyed immediately. And with Blade Runner, you think this high concept is like very simple to convey, right? And it is. In the original Blade Runner, don't they start with a Voight-Kampff test, and then what? The android kills a person, and then you realize, there's detectives that hunt androids, so, or whatever they call them. So like replicants. So like that movie really could have easily been just an action flick, right? And the fact that it's so complex is really kind of amazing that even happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were. My understanding was that they wanted to do sort of a Chinatown-like film noir, but in the future. And if you watch that film, it's definitely a slow burn. So I think they were definitely going for that type of feel with it. I think it's a directorial trick, and you probably see this in written fiction as well. Is you start off with this intense, really intense violent scene or action scene, and then you pull away, and then there's this like very slow build of character and whatnot. I think also a lot of today's like Hollywood films, they don't have a lot of patience, I guess is the way I would describe it. They sort of expect the audience to get bored really quickly. So like, well, we better have action. We better have an explosion at least one explosion every 10 minutes. Otherwise the audience will get bored. And, I think that's why I love, both the original and the new film, because it respects the audience. It says, no, I know you're not going to get bored with this, or at least, the people who really want to see this. I read a lot of reviews. I read a lot of professional reviews and fan reviews, and some people said, yeah, this movie's boring. The new movie's boring. And that's a perfectly valid point of view. I didn't feel that way, but some people said, sorry. Yeah.
No, it really does, it contributes to why it was such a miracle, because especially with the new one, I mean, knowing that they added the voiceovers after original test audiences were unhappy with the product, that, there was the whole thing about Harrison Ford being angry as hell that he had to do the voiceovers, and he thought they were stupid, and some people even thought that he, kind of didn't quite do a good job of them, in hopes that they would end up cutting them in the end. But they added them because test audiences were confused. And I thought, well, gee, if 1982 audiences are confused, what are they going to do to audiences in 2017 who are, presumably, portedly, always distracted by, smartphones and stuff? How are they going to sit through a 2 hour, 45-minute film without them doing the same kind of dumbing down? And, I was so pleased that they didn't appear to do that.
Okay, wait, before we get to the new movie, I have a couple of things I want to say about the old movie. And so one is, Matt, speaking of what people making it were thinking, I don't know if you read this book. There's this book called Future Noir by Paul M. Salmon, which is fantastic. It's one of the best making of movie books I've ever read.
I read it about 10 years ago, I think I read it around the time that it would be 10 years ago when the final cut came out. And then I just bought the new version, which has like expanded sections with the new film. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through that, but I didn't finish that one yet.
Uh-huh. Do you have a preference, Matt, between the final cut and the director's cut and the theatrical cut and all that stuff?
I like the final cut. It has a few extended scenes, which for me is really cool. You get to see a little bit deeper into the world. It fixes some of the continuity problems, and also just some of the shots, especially of the city, are like cleaned up. There's that famous part where the dove is released in the original theatrical release. It was like some really crappy shot of like a dove flying above like some steel pipe, and you're supposed to think, wait, this is the same industrial, super densely crowded city that we saw in all these other shots. And then so yeah,
it's like a blue sky, isn't it? It's
like I think they're getting a little too literal with the metaphor there, but it fixes a lot of that stuff, and it's sort of the director's final vision, so I'm okay with that, and that's usually the one that whenever I rewatch, I'll watch that one.
Yeah, well, and the final cut makes it very clear to my mind that Deckard is a replicant.
Yes, but I like to leave it ambiguous because I think it makes it a better film. But
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, yes, sir. I did want to ask you, do you want to just say a bit more about, is there anything that do you have any criticisms of Blade Runner, or just say more about how you feel about the movie and the different versions and stuff?
The 1982 version?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, all of the criticisms that I would have are sort of, related to the era in which it was done. I mean, I actually would love to have that version without the, voiceovers. I also hated the voiceovers, and I remember the first time I watched it, I thought it was odd. It didn't quite seem to fit. And it seemed hokey. And, I knew that part of that hokiness was the, sort of noir detective thing. And having watched a lot of like Humphrey Bogart, detective stories growing up, and I was homeschooled, so I watched Turner Classic Movies for hours and hours and hours, and I understood where all of that was coming from, but it was still really heavy-handed. And so I was very pleased when, years later I found out that they were added, and that they were added, sort of disdainfully. But that, other than that, it's a perfect film, and it's timeless, despite, the fact that it's very clear when it was made. Aesthetically, it's very clear that when it was made. And having the, 80s shoulder pads and the shiny lips and all of that stuff. But yeah, I think it's, pretty timeless overall.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I appreciate you guys indulging me, but I can tell that you're just raring to go when it comes to talking about this new movie. So Daniel, I'm actually kind of curious what you thought of the new movie, because being not such a huge fan of the original Blade Runner.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I loved it. I'm glad that I went and saw it. It took all afternoon. Also, whenever they started playing the movie, I think they accidentally were playing the 3D version on a 2D screen. So there were a few minutes where I was like, wow, they're getting really out there with these graphics. Like, this is fucked. And also the original, when the movie opens, there are the subtitles that sort of lay out the, the general lay of the land. And for whatever reason, those were cropped. And I was like, these subtitles don't make any fucking sense. Like, what's wrong with these people? This is how it starts. So anyway, once they restarted the movie, and I was able to really watch it. So I really liked it. I'll say honestly that the original Blade Runner, I have to swallow a few yawns during that film. This new one, that never happened. So because it's it felt like a real detective story. Like, I mean, they were literally, it's like, here's a clue. Okay, let's go get the clue analyzed, from the funny person over here. Okay, now we know more. Now let's move forward. So that kind of pulled me through the film, in a way that I was able, there was enough plot there for me that my poor, ADD, brain was able to, focus on it and get pulled through. In terms of the deeper themes, man, okay, I write a lot about robots, and I have there's a cardinal sin, which is you get to the end and you go, he was a robot, like that thing, like that reveal that a person was a robot the whole time has just been done so many times that I consider it off limits. But we're doing full spoilers, right? That's fine.
Yeah. Although maybe let's talk about maybe some of the beginning of the movie kind of stuff before we get into the end of the movie kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, anyway, there were some reveals that I felt like were pretty fresh in terms of dealing with robots and the line between robots and humans. I have to say I found myself from a technology perspective kind of confused about the mechanics of how the robots work. Like, I guess they breathe, because there's a part where robots are having they're drowning or they're getting punched in the neck or whatever. But it doesn't matter if you stab them. They're okay with that. They can bleed, but then I guess they can bleed to death. I was having trouble figuring out what the fuck kills it. Is it okay to curse during this?
Yeah, I mean, okay. the horse just kind of left the barn at the.
Yeah, I know. Apologies. Yeah. I'm taking it to a blue place here. But I was just like, okay, so I don't understand the rules on what kills one of these things and how strong they are and stuff. So that I found myself a little distracted by that. But the overall plot, it hung together. It was tight. It was a great detective story. All the little gizmos and things I loved. And then I felt like the reveals and especially the love story were incredibly interesting to me and just like, new. Like I've seen versions of it, but I haven't seen this stuff before. So whatever, thumbs up from me.
Well, yeah, let me pick up on the thing about the nature of the replicants, because I agree with you that I thought it was a little more confusing in this one than in the previous Blade Runner movie, because in the previous Blade Runner movie, there's the very strong sense, at least for me, that they're like real dolls kind of constructed from biological parts, and that's why there's the guy with the eyeballs and the liquid nitrogen and stuff. And in this one, we find out that they have DNA, and it seems like what is the difference between a replicant and a human felt a lot more ambiguous in this movie compared to the last one.
And one more thing I gotta say, like, just from us, and this is sort of like what Sarah was saying about the original Blade Runner, where they kind of like they're not making the movie in a vacuum, right? They know they've got to sell the movie, and therefore they've got to make some commercial decisions. Jared Leto, or however you pronounce it, and Harrison Ford, these are like the biggest stars. And so like all of the advertising led me to kind of believe that they were going to play a bigger role. And then, and especially Harrison, it was fine. I felt like his character came in at a perfectly reasonable time, and that was all great. They alluded to him. He was a mystery. But like the big bad guy, like he didn't ever, I was confused about who was the bad guy. And then I realized, I thought actually another directorial trick to make a bad guy seem really bad is you introduce a henchman who's a really bad motherfucker. And then you realize this isn't our bad guy. Our bad guy's even worse. Whenever the henchman goes to the bad guy and sort of like kneels down and says like, tell me what to do, boss. And I thought that's what they were doing in this film with the, I don't know her name. Anybody remember?
Sylvia Hoeks, yeah. Yeah,
so with her, I thought, wow, oh man, the big bad guy must be really bad. And then we get introduced to him, and then we realize, oh wait, he's really just going to sort of show up and spout like, philosophical nonsense occasionally. And he's not really like, I didn't really feel like he was a villain. He didn't really ever interact with anybody or do anything, So, the person getting into the fist fight to the death in the end, he's not that person. So, I felt like, maybe I'd been a little misled by all the advertising. Okay, I realized this guy came in for 3 days and shot a couple parts and then he was out,
Okay, wait. So we've got Jared Leto to talk about and Harrison Ford to talk about. But before we get to that, let's just finish up this thing about the difference between humans and replicants in the movie, and is that confusing, right? So, okay, Matt, as our resident Blade Runner expert, what did you think about that? Do you agree with me that it felt a little bit different / confusing in this movie?
But I think that was actually intentional. I mean, my understanding of the replicants are that there's no robotics at all, that they are just purely, created in the lab. They're basically like Petri dish, right? So that they're just, genetic creations. I mean, you saw in the new film, how they were born, literally like coming out of a, pseudo womb there, which had other connotations to me as well. But, they're just like, genetic creations. They're basically, I don't want to say born because that word is loaded in this film, but they are brought to life, as in adult bodies. And in order to, basically keep them emotionally balanced, they have to give them false memories. And I thought that was really cool that they in this film, the replicants know that they are not real, and that the memories are there just to give them stability. And
I like that too.
And for me, it was just the film was, showed very clearly that they were just human-like. I mean, we had developed the ability to create sentient life. So what, and then what does that mean for us? How does that change, what we are? If we're no longer, the product of evolution, but we're actively participating in it.
But see, the replicants seem to be able to punch through steel and all sorts of, put their hands in liquid nitrogen and all sorts of really remarkable.
They established that in the first film, right? So you have that scene where Leon sticks his hand in the liquid nitrogen, right? And
right. But so I'm saying, so in the first movie, that gave me the idea that these are not just sort of genetically tweaked human beings, but are like maybe their muscles are made out of something significantly different than human muscles are made out of, or things like that.
My understanding was that they were engineered to be really, really good at a specific task, right? So you have these soldiers that are engineered to be really, really good at being soldiers. Kay's character, Gosling's character, is engineered to be a really, really good, essentially, bounty hunter, right? And so, one of the things I thought that was really good about his acting was, if you remember the scene where they shoot down his spinner, and he basically has a lightning strike. There's no power. If you watch his face, he doesn't look scared. He's like concerned, but he's not terrified like a human would be. And then you realize, oh, he's just engineered to just be better at everything. That's the way I saw it. The only part that sort of broke it for me in believability was when he literally jumped through that wall. And then I was like, oh yeah, I don't know,
yeah. Why'd they put that in? That struck out as odd to me.
I couldn't figure it out the first time, and when I saw it the second time, if you watch really quickly, Harrison Ford locks the door. So it was like, oh, it was just that's how he had to get through. But
I think it also set up that he would survive the explosion that was about to come, because if he can jump through a wall, then he can also absorb shrapnel damage. But anyway.
Yeah, he did survive.
He did.
Why'd they leave him there? I mean, he's like
I don't
their
think that
number
makes
one.
any sense.
Okay,
that was a big flaw. That
but yeah, again, let's try to stick to the first half of the movie for the moment.
They should have just blown him out of the window. Oh.
But so Sarah, do you have anything you want to add about my concerns here about the replicants?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the point is that they are very advanced biological beings. They're like, the closest word that we have is clones. And, instead of using the word clones, it's replicants. And, obviously we have the ability to, make them stronger in whatever way, without necessarily altering you get the impression due to the difficulty of hunting these characters down that, they have human bones. When they die, they don't really leave behind a bunch of robotic parts, because if they did, it would be a lot easier to tell who is truly human and who is a replicant. So that part, I think, requires a little willing suspension of disbelief. It's, definitely this idea that they are biological beings, and 100% so, but that they just happen to possess certain qualities that we, don't even have the science fiction to support yet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Daniel was talking about the Jared Leto character, and I saw that he was supposedly, I think Jared Leto said that he had based the character on some Silicon Valley types, and I know you're kind of out in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I thought of when I watched it. Is, I was thinking, oh no, this guy is totally believable, because, I think in 2017 the radical visionary is a kind of villain and a kind of hero at the same time. Like, we're not sure whether Elon Musk, for instance, is ever going to go evil. Right. Is he going to just always be altruistic and always be humanistic, or is he going to at some point do something really scary? And so, some would argue he already has. And so I feel like, especially living in Silicon Valley, where the TV show Silicon Valley, I actually can't stand watching it because it's too realistic. It's not satirical enough to be funny, so it just makes me uncomfortable. So the whole time I'm watching it, I'm just like, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this. I hate all of these people, and I can't watch it. But, that's why, like, when I watched this, when I saw Jared Leto's character, I thought, yes, this totally is a believable, sort of Silicon Valley, visionary who's so caught up in his own way of thinking, and his own prejudices, that he is a truly terrifying, powerful individual.
Well, and the resonances with Musk, where he's just talking about how we have to settle the stars and everything, it seems like that can't be accidental.
No. I mean, they mentioned, they name dropped Elon Musk in the last night's episode of Star Trek Discovery. So.
Yeah. And then Daniel was also mentioning Harrison Ford, And I wish that, I mean, there's no way this could have ever happened, but I wish that I hadn't known Harrison Ford was in this movie. If they could have somehow kept that secret, that would have been so amazing. I actually,
I agree.
After I saw the first trailer for this movie, whenever the trailer would come on when I was at the movies, I would close my eyes and cover my ears and go like, ah, 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 ah. But yeah, it wasn't enough to prevent me from knowing that Harrison. And then like they showed the scene where he meets Ryan Gosling, and so that kind of tells you where the movie's going, because that scene doesn't happen until so late in the movie.
Yeah. Although to the editor, whoever edited the trailers, to their credit, they did avoid or they cut it up in such a way that at least made me think that their first meeting was cordial. And Harrison Ford,
really?
Wait, like that's how not exactly cordial. Like he pulls his gun out and then he's like, "I have some questions for you," and then they're drinking, and you're like, "Oh, okay." I didn't think it would go that, but then no, like when you see it, I mean, I guess we're doing spoilers. Like Decker just shoots him. He's like, "Boom," get out of my casino. See you later. Boom.
See, I had made the assumption that Gosling was hunting him, and that Ryan Gosling was a new Blade Runner, and he's hunting, an old robot. But I'm glad that it wasn't that way. In fact, it really subverted all my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't. As I said, I covered my eyes for all the trailers, so I didn't know that Ryan Gosling was a replicant. So that was really the first scene where he suddenly, like, unexpectedly just beats the absolute fucking shit out of Dave Bautista. Really was, I was like, holy shit, that surprised me.
It's when he gets stabbed, I guess. So if we're talking Harrison, then is he a replicant? What's the consensus here?
I mean, the filmmakers have said that it's purposefully ambiguous.
Really?
That's the best way, really.
Yeah, but here's what I thought. The reason that he went out to the orange place was that there's a dirty bomb that went off there, and there's radiation traces on the wooden horse, right? So I've always loved the idea in science fiction of robots living in human lethal environments in order to be left alone. And so my assumption right then was, this guy is clearly immune to radiation poisoning and living out here alone in a place where a dirty bomb went off. And then I was happy to make that assumption and to sort of feel like I knew. And then later, I think they did some things to make it more ambiguous. And I was like, oh, wait. Well, how's the human being living with radiation poisoning, was my feeling.
Although when you see when Kay is flying the drone over the city, it says radiation levels nominal, and like I was like, it didn't say elevated, so I was like, oh, well, maybe, yeah. I mean, that's a good point. But one of the things that I love about Blade Runner and old and new films is the way that you can read things different ways. So you're like, oh, well, he's clearly a replicant because he's living in a high radiation area, and in my mind, I'm like, well, he's not really as strong as the other replicants, so maybe he's not one. I don't know. And then there's that ambiguous statement that Niander Wallace says to him, like, if you were a replicant. That's like clearly like they were just trying to be as ambiguous as possible, which I like that.
Well, actually, Matt, let me pick up on the thing about the strength, because the way I read the original movie is that the replicants who don't know that they're replicants just have normal human strength, because if they were like tearing the doors off their hinges, that would give away pretty quickly to them that they were humans, right? So if Deckard's a replicant, he only has normal human strength, and Rachel, from everything we see in the first movie, only seems to have normal human strength.
But why would you make a Blade Runner with normal strength? Why wouldn't you make a Blade Runner with superhuman strength? I think emotionally, like from a, to be satisfied with the first film emotionally, for me, I think Deckard has to be a human, right? Because if you look at the film carefully, all the humans are extremely cold. They're like brutal and calculating, and it's the replicants that really have the strongest feelings. So it's like if he's a human, I think it fits into that. On the other hand, the ambiguity could work. But if he's 100% replicant, I feel like it almost subverts its own theme there. I don't know.
So it has huge implications, though, based on the idea of a child, right? If a human and a robot can make a baby, that's one thing. If a robot and a robot can make a baby, that's a totally different thing.
But either way, the replicants aren't, they're able to basically create their own future without need of.
But the whole plot hinges on this idea of this miracle and this child. And so what kind of seems strange to me is they're hinging all the stakes of the entire film on an ambiguous point, right? Like all these people that are gathered in the sewers are gathering their armies. All these replicants that are gathering their armies, for a future robot uprising. This is all based on their belief in that this child has been created. And yet we don't know, but we don't know whether the child is, this could be huge. I'm like getting into it. This is exactly the beauty of it, huh? I'm a little too,
well, that is the
OCD
question, right?
About it.
Right. That is the question. Is Anna's her name? Anna Stelline or Stelline?
Is it an angel or is it a person? Yeah.
Well,
and the guy
is she
calls
100%?
them angels a lot. Sorry.
Yeah. Like, is she 100% replicant? Like, are both of her parents replicants, or is she just half replicant? Mm-hmm. And is her immune system really compromised because of that, or is that just a way that she's been protected?
Yeah, actually, Sarah, could you expand on what you were just saying about Christianity? I think that's interesting.
Well, I mean, we have entire religions, plural, based around the embracing some kind of myth, and it's always some kind of origin story. So the idea that these underground androids are, hinged on this belief is very believable, and it's very human. Yeah. And so it's a tie-in that this happens in science fiction all the time. And so I don't find that implausible at all.
It's like divine origins, right? Like,
yeah.
So Leto calls, is it Leto or Leto? Do you guys?
I've heard it Leto, but I could be wrong about
Leto.
this.
Great. Yeah. I don't care. Leto. So like, he's constantly calling the replicants angels, right? And so you think about like, is Jesus Christ a man, or was he like divine, or what, right? And of course, like, I don't know, you run into this all the time. I can't stop singing Shiny off the Moana soundtrack as a result of having kids, and there's you can't expect a demigod to beat a decapod is like a line that runs through my head every day, unfortunately. But like the idea of a demigod, the idea of having divine origins, like it's definitely a common theme in religion and in art, and I think it's showing up here.
Well, there's a lot of go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and among early Christians, getting back to Sarah's thing, like there was a huge fight about whether Jesus was fully divine, or was he like fully human and fully divine, or something like that. And so like you can get these movements built around very ambiguous, if not contradictory, ideas about the savior figure.
It's like having an entire religion based on how fast ravens fly, according to, the all of the people fighting about the Game of Thrones finale.
Right. Well, the original film had a lot of Christian mythology too, right? Because you have this idea of Batty as the fallen angel, and then there's that scene where he sticks the nail through his hand, like a crucifixion. I think the whole idea is full of Christian mythology.
Well, right, and I feel like this movie almost works better as mythology than as like an extrapolation of the future or something, right? That it does feel, especially as the movie goes on, it becomes more about the sort of chosen one and the divine birth and those kinds of ideas. It feels more about a story of humans and angels and demigods and demons and things than it does about the future of AI.
That's totally my feeling too. And I'm huge into robots and AI and all that. And then, you go and you're like, okay, what's really funny to me is I felt like Blade Runner 2049 has a lot more in common with RUR, like the original play that introduced the word robot from the 1920s, than it has to do with any modern science fiction, mainly because in RUR, the whole thing is about these replicants that are indistinguishable from humans that are oppressed as slaves, and then they rise up and kill every human on the planet, only they can't procreate. And so they leave one human alive, the scientist who made them, and he works with his own species nearly extinct. He works feverishly to figure out a way to allow these robots to procreate and make babies. And it's like, yeah, whoever wrote this was aware of RUR, is my feeling, like, which cracks me up because it's like, that's like the first mention of the word robot in English. I mean, it's really the first.
Yeah, but they never really use the word robot in the film. I mean, I think that robot implies something mechanical.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things I thought that was really interesting and a really amazing directorial choice was, they didn't, like, obviously the 2019 of the first Blade Runner is very different from the one we're going to approach in many ways. So they said, okay, you know what? We're just going to run with that future. So it's like the timeline split, right? So in this 2049, the Soviet Union still exists, right? And so it's like a different chronology, but it's also the future, which I found kind of fascinating because usually it's like we're extrapolating from our present, but this is like, no, this is a different universe,
Well, there's Pan Am and Atari. I thought
right.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to pick up, Matt, on something you just said, where you said that the replicants are not machines, but of course there is the character Joy in the movie, who is just a purely mechanical, character, intelligence or whatever, and so it's sort of an open question: is she, like, quote unquote human as well, or is she like or is she just a philosophical zombie? She has no inner life. She just does what her programming code suggests and things. Actually, Daniel, you're our PhD in robotics. What did you think of Joy versus Kay, for example?
Joy was my favorite character. Like, I loved, in fact, that dynamic with her felt the question of whether her feelings mean anything, and whether when she says something to Kay, whether it means anything. That dynamic was probably my favorite. I mean, whether Deckard's a replicant or not, like, I could kind of take it or leave it because it doesn't have anything to do with my life. But right now, we're seeing real applications that are kind of like Joy, in these AI personal assistants that are slowly getting smarter and smarter. So I'm talking about Alexa and, like, the Google Home. And so, okay, like, I love it, first of all. So, like, first of all, they leave it totally ambiguous, just like everything. So, for instance, she tells him what he needs to hear. She's the one who says out loud, "If you were real, that means you have a soul. That means you're worth love. That means, all this stuff." She says his interior, thoughts out loud, his dreams and aspirations, and that's so funny because, like, then right after that scene, you see a big, they take the time to show a part where, there's an advertisement and you realize that this Joy thing is a product that's for sale, and it says in the advertising, she will say everything you need to hear or something like that. And like, they literally say that, and so the question is, if you have this AI that's telling you what you need to hear, and telling you that she loves you, like, and saying it with so much emotion and just completely convincing, like, does it mean anything? And I love that question because that's a question that we're going to have to answer in our lifetimes, I feel like. Building fully, completely realistic, like, impossible to distinguish between people and robots, that's probably never going to happen, honestly. It doesn't make any sense to build a robot out of DNA. It's cheaper to just make a person, we do it every day. So seeing this really made me excited. And then one more little point about it is, I've seen something similar in, the movie AI, and I loved it too. When Gigolo Joe, gets hired by this woman, and he shows up and he looks at her and he says, "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." And he's a robot and it means nothing, right? For him to say that, he'll say that to anybody that he sees. But it also means everything because he really fucking means it, because he's programmed to believe it with every fiber of his being. And so it's this great, like, paradox, right? His opinion counts for nothing, yet unlike any other human being in the world who might say that but would never mean it, he really means it, even though it's worth nothing. So anyway, I love that paradox. I love that character Joy. I love how that whole arc played out.
Well,
it was one of my favorite parts of the movie.
This is something I was talking about with Adam Savage in the last episode, but I feel like because of movies like Blade Runner have conditioned everyone to feel like robots are going to be the next like marginalized social group that we have to fight for civil rights for, and that in the near future, the situation is much more likely to be we're going to have a problem with people saying like, no, this is a person, when it's not at all. It's just it's just software running a program.
Actually, yeah, it's the fear that you have is that you fall in love and then she's constantly asking you to drink a Coke. Have you had a Coke today? And like that is way more, by the way, I mean, I think that's way more likely and a way more realistic scenario to be afraid of, which is that we are going to be grossly manipulated through, as AI and as these products gain the ability to communicate with us like people and to pull those levers of emotion and gesture and face recognition, emotion recognition, much more complex text to speech where they can put emotion into their voices. Like they're going to pull all those human levers. And you think about human beings, we are completely uninoculated for this. We have spent like a couple hundred, maybe 300,000 years as Homo sapiens interacting via speech and gestures only with human beings. Never in the history of evolution, never in the history of humankind has there been a moment where we spoke to an artifact in the environment and it spoke back to us. So when that happens, we're going to be completely unable, I think, to defend ourselves, at least for a little while. And that may involve people, buying a lot of products because they're in love, because they're literally in love. And that scares the shit out of me. So,
yeah. See, Sarah, what did you think of Joy?
I thought she was great. It's funny. There was a review I read this morning that one of my friends posted, and talking about sort of the lack of, and I think it was actually in Wired. It was something like
it's like the politics of Blade Runner aren't that futuristic, right?
Yeah. And I thought, well, of course they're not. They're not supposed to be. It is not a, we should not presuppose that the goal of science fiction should be to morally instruct us. And so I am not going to be one of those feminists who has a hard time or has a problem with this movie, because I think that the goal of Blade Runner, if it's going to be true to Blade Runner, which it is, thank goodness, is to actually show the world as it is. And I think that a lot of feminists have a hard time with that. They had a hard time with it in Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones is designed to be a very patriarchal society because it's reflecting on and talking about patriarchy. Okay, so Blade Runner is the same. Obviously, if we have a world where, it's a world that's like ours, racism still exists, sexism still exists, objectifying women still exists. But one of the things that the writer of that piece said was, this idea that this women's disposability that, they only sort of touched on, but they didn't really explore. And the writer was sort of interpreting the reaction of Wallace and the newborn woman as this horrible thing that was all about Wallace. But I think that everybody in the theater was horrified for that newborn. And I think that the fear that the newborn was putting out there was palpable. And, it was a horrifying scene. It was absolutely disgusting. And so I can't really imagine having that interpretation of the film, walking away from that and thinking that that was not about objectification and about using other, races and other sexes for your ends. So, to me, what makes Blade Runner prescient is its bleakness. And I think as a feminist, I want science fiction to show us a mirror. I don't want it to break the fourth wall and tell us, oh, by the way, this is bad, and it shouldn't have to do that. But I love Joy. I think that, she is also designed to be ambiguous, especially in the end, when you see that over large projection of her sort of, almost laughing at Kay. And, that whole scene is just, brutal, because it really is meant to instill doubt in us again that, okay, wait, she was programmed to do this. And what a horribly lonely feeling that would be. But, I think that, it is designed to be ambiguous for a reason. And we are, it works very well to make us question, what is real about affection and what has been bought and paid for and designed to please us.
Right. I thought that article was, I thought it had some legitimate points about representation. I think I agree with you that, it maybe wasn't giving the movie enough credit in certain things. I don't remember the article mentioning anything about Anna being the chosen one and having a pretty complex, interesting personality and scenes and so on. There was, it reminds me of the article was mentioning this scene where Robin Wright's character, who was otherwise a very sort of strong female character, was kind of hitting on Ryan Gosling in a way that sort of stuck out to me as odd. I don't know what anyone else thought of that.
Well, she sees him as, disposable to a certain level. And so she's going to objectify him just as women have been objectified by people in positions of power forever.
Yeah, I felt like she hit on him basically because it was convenient. Like, she had a drink. She was like, maybe I'll, nail this piece of furniture on my way home. And then he's like, no thanks. And then she's like, fine, bye. Like, it wasn't breaking her heart,
Doesn't he have to do what she says from her point of view? Like,
he didn't
like
say
genetically
no.
engineered or something to follow orders or something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure if she had made it an order, he would have to.
Yeah.
So
she did. All she said was, I think she said, "What happens if I finish this?" And
like she was basically, like she's basically doing the same thing that, in the same way the relationship between Joy and Kay. Like, she was saying, would it be real if I finish this? Like, that's the way I read it. Like, would you make the decision to fool around with me? Like, you know what I'm saying?
She wants to have her cake and eat it too. She wants to be his choice. She wants what the Borg Queen wanted out of Captain Picard.
I felt like they introduced this idea, though, at the beginning of the movie that the new model replicants have to obey orders. And it felt like that did not maintain itself throughout the whole movie. It felt like it kind of like petered out. And it seems like toward the end of the movie, the replicants, it seems like they didn't really have to follow orders.
that especially with Love. She just walked into the police station and murders people constantly. Like, how do you get away with that? Also, I guess that Neander, like, he could have made her special or something so that she can break all the rules. But how do you just walk around murdering the police chief and murdering people?
Well, she said she was going to twist what happened, right? She said she was going to say that something else happened. So you get the impression that she's very smart. She knows how the rules work and she knows how to bend them when she needs to.
Wait,
exactly.
She's a replicant, right?
She's a replicant, yeah. But also the fact is that the police department is heavily dependent upon replicants to do their job. So I'm sure the Wallace Corporation has all sorts of, back doors into the system. Because without replicants, they wouldn't be able to do their job.
But how are you going to have a replicant resistance movement if they can just all be ordered to stop?
Yeah,
resisting?
That's true. There's got to be a governor that's coming off somewhere.
It's a good point. Yeah. They did play fast and loose with that concept of they must obey.
Well, there was that little video at the beginning, the background videos that were on YouTube, which those are sort of criminally underviewed. Did you guys get a chance to watch those? David,
I watched them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the one that demonstrates that exact point, right? Where Wallace, does his trick again of killing a replicant in order to make a point. He seems to do that a lot. It's a pretty messy sort of way to make a point. It does actually remind me of Silicon Valley when that guy's always bringing in elephants, in order to make his point.
Oh, yeah.
Or wildlife. get a replicant in here. Somebody give me a knife. I got a point to make. And I'm going to be able to make it by stabbing this guy, making this guy stab himself. It's going to involve stabbing,
Yeah, but see, that struck me as very unpersuasive because his whole agenda is to persuade people that the replicants, that he can be trusted basically to produce replicants that aren't going to hurt anyone. And it seems like that would just freak the fuck out of everybody, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't give that guy permission to start manufacturing these things if there's like blood spraying all over my conference room.
I think he was appealing though to their desire for power. Like I think in that scene, he was making a very deliberate choice, and that's part of what makes him the quote unquote evil visionary, because he recognized that, okay, if I appeal to their power and this, sure, they might act shocked, but they'll get over it in 2 minutes. They'll think about it and they'll go, okay, he's right.
Also, the question is, does Kay actually disobey any orders? Like once Robin Wright's character dies, I mean, whose orders are he disobeying, right?
Yeah, clearly if somebody on the street said, "Hey, slit your throat," he wouldn't do it because people hate his guts.
You'd have to have some kind of master slave relationship, and he kept calling her madam. So basically, maybe he was just keyed to her. She was like, some kind of programming, like, he had to obey her. And she said, give me your gun and your badge. You have 48 hours. And then she dies before that 48 hours is up. So,
well, I suspect there'd be a chain of command, like anything else. You would think,
yeah.
So on this note, I would love to ask you guys a question I've been wondering about since I saw the film. So we've established that these replicants do have to obey orders, but you can tell sometimes they don't want to do it, right? And there's that moment when, Neander guts the newborn and Love is watching and she cries, right?
Yeah.
And I think she cries a few times. There's kind of quite a bit of stoic tears going down the old face.
Whenever she watches death, I think because she genuinely feels. I think that she recognizes herself as a slave. I think the way I read that scene where she's observing Neander stab that replicant is that she generally feels bad for this creation that is just this woman, this being that just exists just for a point, and she's crying, but she can't express this because she's a total slave. And then again, when she kills Robin Wright, she cries because I think she genuinely doesn't want to have to do this. I mean, that's the way I saw it. Although she does a second later, like basically drop Robin Wright's face on the desk. So I was like, okay, maybe that's not the correct read on it. But I get the sense that there's something under the surface with her that she's feeling. She has these intense emotions that she cannot express because she's a slave.
Well, she's mimicking the emotions of her master. I mean, she does the thing with the kiss in the end when she tries to kill, Kay, mimicking absolutely Jared Leto's kiss of the newborn, and this sort of disposable way. So I think that it's quite possible that, either he sort of imbued her with a sense of his own moral leanings, or she has been programmed to be so enamored of him that she's just replicating what he is doing while simultaneously questioning, what am I doing? Why does this hurt when I do it? That kind of thing. I mean, they in the original, they said, they're not supposed to have emotions. And then obviously that's completely wrong. And so it's possible that in the process of taking away emotions and then implanting various memories and everything, it can be very confusing.
I think that's brilliant because it actually explains why that scene even happened. Because otherwise, there's absolutely no reason for Wallace to gut that replicant. He clearly did it as some sort of sadistic thing. He wasn't like he wasn't doing anything scientific. He gutted her in front of his pet robot, his pet replicant. And he shared all of his philosophical exposition to a replicant who probably already knows all that stuff.
Yeah.
But he did also commit this violent act in front of her, which, I mean, the only reason I could think of for that scene, besides conveying exposition to an audience about what an evil guy he is, would be to somehow emotionally, scar love and make her capable of doing similar acts or something.
Well, we do the same thing to children. I mean, look, if you want an example from science fiction is, Ned Stark executing the guy who ran at the very beginning of Game of Thrones in front of his children, very proudly to say, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and we, the executioner always swings, the man who decides to kill is the one who does the dirty deed.
But this is one thing that strikes me both about Blade Runner 2049 and the original Blade Runner. Is like I was reading reviews of this movie all day today, and I've never seen so many reviews that were so long and detailed as for this movie. And it feels like both of these movies put a big burden on the audience to come up with these elaborate structures to explain what's going on in the movie. And I'm not sure if that's a bug or a feature or not. I feel like it's probably both to some degree.
It's totally a feature, especially the inclusion, the inclusion of Pale Fire. It wasn't just a random, literary drop like sometimes movies do, where they sort of throw something in there to make it seem intelligent. Like there are so many parallels to Pale Fire.
Sorry, explain where that comes in the movie, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. The book that Kay shows Joy and, makes the joke, well, you hate this book, is Nabokov's Pale Fire. And the whole book is the same kind of structure of you have a, character who the reader is not sure if they're real or imagined. You have a unreliable narrator who is interpreting the poem left behind by this poet, this character. And it's one of those books where you are not sure what is real and what is not. And there is constant ambiguity that is on purpose. So you have people who have studied these books for, decades, still disagreeing about what it means. And, there are a number of things that, if you've read Pale Fire, that you would pick up on the movie and going, oh my God, that's totally a reference to that. I mean, even the lines from the test, the baseline test, are directly from the lines in Pale Fire.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of built-in ambiguity, but then there's also a lot of stuff that's maybe just a mistake. And that's that's where we all live. Is trying to figure out the difference between those two things, and trying to figure out whether it's genius or whether it's a bunch of crap.
Well, even in Pale Fire, there's a moment where the character draws a bunch of meaning from something that happens, and then later finds out that it was a typo. And so that is literally a theme in the book. Is when we base all this meaning in our lives from something that is a mistake. And, the first lines of Pale Fire, I was the shadow of the waxwing, slain by the false azure of the window pane. I was the smudge of ashen fluff, and I lived on, flew on in the reflected sky. And so this image of this bird flying into a window and crashing and dying, but living on in this alternate universe of the reflected sky, it's the levels of which this book connects to Blade Runner are just intense, and I have a lot of respect for whoever made that decision.
That's pretty amazing. And by the way, those baseline tests, I didn't think they would ever top the Voight-Kampff test, but I think they did.
Oh, yeah.
I also just want to mention one thing I really liked about this movie, in contrast to because there have been a whole bunch of, sort of sequels to old, to like classic movies of the 80s and so on. And one thing I really liked about this movie, as opposed to The Force Awakens, one of the big problems I had with The Force Awakens was how many fourth wall breaking winks at the audience there were, where they're like, hey, remember this from Star Wars? Remember this from Star Wars? And I felt like this movie did a really good job of, you recognize all these things from Blade Runner. It's, it's totally Blade Runner. You're like, I recognize this, I recognize that. But I never felt like there were any moments where the director was like inserting himself into the movie to wink at the audience, or the characters were winking at the audience. It always felt completely
Agreed.
it
It just
believed
felt
in its own
seamless.
reality.
It's just like a seamless transition from the previous movie.
There was one point, and maybe this is just because I've seen the original so many times. It's just, when Kay is laying on the steps at the end, and they play the Tears and Rain music, and I thought that was a little too on the note for me. I don't know how you guys felt about that. You know what I'm talking about?
I didn't pick up on it until after I read some reviews. Yeah. Tears and Snow.
Tears and Snow, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, like, I thought the music, like the Vangelis soundtrack for the original, I used to just put that on and listen to it. It's just atmospheric. You get in the world. This music, I already downloaded the CD and listened to it a couple times. It is really like hard to listen to, but I love it. But it's not the same kind of music. And one of the things about the first film that I think part of the reason that it was copied so much is just you have this visual appeal that is, even though it's a dystopia, it's sexy, right? The original, there's a sexiness to it. There's something about that world that is appealing. The new film, I do not want to live in that world. That is a true dystopia. That is like every part of that world. I was like, nope, don't want to go there. Don't want to live there. Don't want to experience.
You're right. It wasn't as elegant, was it?
But I like that. I think that they really showed that this was a dystopian world 30 years before this film. Imagine what happened after that. Like, things got worse. There's blizzards all the time. There's like, they have to have these giant seawalls to protect it, the water from coming in. They have these massive garbage dumps and this orphanage, which I think was going to sell Kay like a child. So like it's gotten like real. I mean, maybe all that stuff was in the first film, just we didn't see it. But it's like it's gotten so much worse. And I thought, kudos to the directors and the set designers, etc., for not being afraid to take it to that conclusion, to continue.
Though, there were animals, right? I mean, well, there were bees at least, right?
That's
I assume they were real.
I have a question about that, and I don't know how much David wants us to talk about that, because it might be like, okay, we see the bees, right? And then he sticks his hand in the thing, and there are bees on his hand, and there's a quick cut away. So whenever I see like a quick cut away from something that intense, I'm like, okay, that was important. And then, if you remember at the very beginning of the film, Kay finds a little buttercup flower under the tree. Mm-hmm. And if you think about this for a second, the bees, right? The bees need flowers, right? So, so Deckard, my theory is that Deckard was visiting Rachel's grave, right? He had, who else put the flower?
Yeah. That's a good theory. Because flowers wouldn't even exist in this world. Yeah, it didn't hit me right away that would be complete. What hit me was every one of those bees, if they're really alive, are worth like $1 million. If I was him, I would be scooping those fuckers up like well, whatever. I mean, he's not that interested in money, I guess. But, and then there's the dog.
Yeah, and then the dog. But he also says, Deckard says, not much to do here at night. So it makes you say, well, what's he doing during the day? He's farming bees. Maybe he's doing like,
Well, I think he was making a reference to it being Vegas or whatever, right? Like, and the fact that it used to be
I mean, again, you have these lines that can be taken, in 12 different ways.
Actually, that's my favorite line of the whole film, which I think sums everything up, is when Kay looks at Deckard and looks at the dog and says, "Is it real?" And Deckard says, "I don't know." Like, that's
he said, "Why don't you ask
in a
him?"
nutshell, right there. Is it real? I don't know.
Well, right.
You can sit here and talk about it all day.
And speaking of the world, Matt, I mean, I don't think we've even said that this is like one of the most amazing looking movies I've ever seen in my life. I mean, my jaw was just on the floor for maybe 60% of the shots in this movie. It's just I could not believe what I was seeing.
I love it when Robin Wright is like, she's like, why don't you come back before the storm? And then you just see him flying back, and then is just building after building after building, and you get these little glimpses into the crevices where you see these, the famous, neon and projected billboards that we know, but that's just like peeking between the cracks, and it's just building after building after building, and then finally we reach, the skyscrapers that we know from Blade Runner. You're like, oh my God, this is just ridiculously large. And I just thought it was just stunning and jaw-dropping. And, one of my favorite scenes in the whole film is when Kay says to Joy, want to go for a ride? And then they cut, and you see, like, the water. I guess they open the floodgates for the wall, and the water just starts pouring through, and this intense note plays. And then you just see him flying, like, over the wall, and then they look up, and then you see Joy looking up, and there's like this ship, but it's half in fog, and you don't know what it is, and they stunning, amazing.
Yeah, well, like in the last episode, Adam Savage, he had seen the movie early, and he was saying if this deserves to win for best cinematography, the Oscar, right? And it's like, well, what is it if this doesn't win the Oscar for best cinematography? Like, what does it take? Like, what is even in contention? I mean, maybe I don't watch every movie, but I can't even imagine what would beat this for best cinematography.
Yeah, and it takes so much restraint to the fact that they were able to do so much new with it while making it look like a continuation of the world they set up in 1982 is, to go back to the idea of this being a miracle, knowing that what we know very cynically about how things work in Hollywood and how often things are, sort of pushed to satisfy focus groups. The original was visually inspired in part by the Nighthawks painting by Edward Hopper. Mm-hmm. And, you see that thread carried through perfectly in this, but at the same time, it's also very new, and it's just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I feel like we have to talk about how I think we all loved this movie pretty much. I loved it anyway. But I think, as Matt maybe mentioned, it's not doing that well at the box office. Sarah, what do you think what do you make of this movie not like underperforming at the box office?
Well, I mean, I think that we forget, just as we get lost in our little filter bubbles, how few people, in terms of the actual numbers, are the kind of person who is obsessed with Blade Runner and, has seen all of these wonderful cult films that, these science fiction films that we talk about so much and we love so much. And I think that it's just, one of those things where it's like, well, first of all, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes, which means that they had fewer, show times, just in terms of the actual physical number of show times that the theaters are able to pump out. But, they made a sequel to a cult classic. What did they expect? And then they actually, deigned to make it as beautiful, if not slightly more beautiful in some ways than the original, and took itself seriously and, was not designed to work with the Fast and Furious crowd, and so I hope that they were sort of hedging their bets. And I think that what is going to happen is that as people start to talk about it, more and more people will see it, and it will have kind of a slow burn.
Yeah. I think it's going to have a long shelf life. I think that, like Sarah said, there's a lot of review buzz and fan buzz about it, and people who may not necessarily see a film like Blade Runner might check it out just because of that.
Yeah.
And there's also, DVD releases and merchandise, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's fitting, right? With the way that the original came out and flopped and then kind of steadily grew over the years. I think, why would you expect this one to be different? I think it'll do the same thing.
Well, I mean, like one of our listeners, Zach Chapman, posted kind of a funny comment on Facebook where he loved the movie, but he says his wife thought it was pretentious and boring. So I'll throw that out there. Do you think there's any validity to the charge of pretentiousness against this movie?
I think that the film wants to achieve something and tries very hard to do that. And you know, I'm paraphrasing something I read recently, but it's just, you know, I'd rather see a spectacular failure than a mediocre film, right? So, but I don't think Blade Runner is a failure. I think it tries very, very hard to do something, and I believe it succeeds. Not everyone is willing, as I said earlier, not everyone is willing to do the work, I guess, to piece the story apart or to you know, not everyone is going into a film expecting that. They might want a Fast and Furious type of film, and that's totally fine. That's not what Blade Runner is.
I mean, though, do you think they could have made any of those long shots any shorter?
They could have, but I don't think that it would have improved it for the rest of us. I think that, again, it would have been about making the movie for focus groups. And I'm so glad that they didn't.
I get bored fast. I have very little patience, unfortunately, and it never made me bored. So I didn't feel like it was pretentious at all. I felt like, you know, there's some movies, there's like this type of movie, like Inception, where it's so thrilling and fast that you're along for the ride, and then later you go, none of that shit made sense, right? And you feel bummed. Like, I think part of the reason that Blade Runner, the original and this new one, are going to be a slow burn is that whenever you get out of it, the House of Cards doesn't fall apart. You don't think, oh, all that shit made no sense when I really think about it. It's just a bunch of plot holes. Instead, that ambiguity makes your mind go, you know, and you start talking about it with your friends. And then if your friend hasn't seen it, well, then they damn well better go see it so that you can talk about it because I've got things I need to talk about. And so, like, you know, I feel like that's the way that like the DNA. That's how this virus spreads, right?
Yeah, it passed the piss test, by the way. Like to me, like, okay, so it's 2 hours and 45 minutes. Both my partner and I had to pee.
Oh, I got up and
halfway through, and neither of us could go to the bathroom because it was just, we didn't want to miss any of it. I was so glad that I went to see it a second time so that I knew exactly which scene I would time my pee in so that I wouldn't have to watch it twice. Which was the scene with the newborn, by the way, because it was that disturbing. I was like, nope, don't need to see that twice.
I peed as soon as he made the realization that he was a human. Like, and then I was like, okay, I felt that building and building. And I'm like, I can't pee before, if I'm gone while he realizes he's human, you know. So like, as soon as he made his realization, I made my realization, and I got up and and ran to the bathroom. I don't know what I missed. The next 2 minutes are blank for me.
I want to agree, though, with what you said, Daniel, about like no movie I can remember in recent memory has forced my mind to fixate on it afterward and think through it the way that this one has. And like you're saying, I keep having things where I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And then I think about it some more. I'm like, well, no, if you look at it this way, it does make sense.
Yeah, and talk about it for an hour and a half.
Like one example of that was that I thought, well, how can Kay be stronger than Dave Bautista if he's either, you know, the son of Deckard and Rachel, or the son, you know, or of the son of two older replicants, or the son of a replicant and a human. But then I'm like, wait, but no, he's not the son of them. He only thinks he is. And I'm like, wait, so that can, you know, you can explain it that way, you know. And I keep like, you know, turning things.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That was the realization that I love, by the way, to take this all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. Like I said, cardinal sin to have the big reveal be that your person was a robot the whole time. It's more interesting to reveal that your robot was a person the whole time, and then to snatch that away from him too. By the time you get to the end, so yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting version of that trope.
Well, yeah, and to make the hero think that they're the chosen one, and then they find out, like, I don't know, 20 minutes before the end of the movie that no, it's actually somebody else. You know.
Well, a lot of Philip K. Dick stuff is tragic in the end, and that doesn't usually play very well with movie audiences, but they were true to it. I mean, it was tragic. Like, he wasn't the one. Like, sorry, dude. You might as well just lay down and die. Like, you're the catalyst. You're the one that started something. Like, bye.
Yeah, I like that aspect of it, that he wasn't the chosen one. I thought that was pretty profound.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm kind of curious, what do you guys think about the challenge of making this movie in a landscape where this idea of robots who seem human and so on is so familiar now, from Battlestar Galactica to Westworld to, it seems like every anime movie is some sort of like iteration of Blade Runner. Like, it seems like it takes something special to add something new at this point, and it seems like we all agree that this movie earns that. Sarah, yeah.
I don't think that the question will ever get old. Like, the essential question that is the heart of all those movies is never going to get old, in part because, we talked about religion and everything, and this whole idea of people having this ultimate question of who are we in the universe? Where did we come from? Were we created? Were we designed? All of that, is so part of the human experience that we forget about it. We forget because we think it's part of something else. And so when it constantly props up in science fiction, we almost think of it as a trope, but it's not. It's, it is something very deep and essential about humanity. And so to me, I think the interesting thing is the different ways in which that question is explored. Westworld is very different from, Blade Runner, even though it has obviously a lot of similarities, even just in the physicality of the robots, that, you open them up in the middle and they are machines. Whereas part of the appeal, I think, of Blade Runner is that biology side that we don't necessarily get as often unless it's in something like Orphan Black, or anything involving, the ethics of cloning.
Yeah, I think they ignored it. There are no robots in this movie. Like I said, they don't focus in the world building on robotics at all. So and I love that, because what they did was they let the theme dictate the world, right? So all the philosophical themes are appearing as a technology that, they're called replicants. They don't even say the word robot. If I were doing world building for this and I knew that there were super advanced, human-like androids that were available, I would think, what are all the models leading up to these? Wouldn't they be emptying the trash? Wouldn't they be doing menial stuff? They wouldn't have human faces, but there'd be robots everywhere, right? If you've advanced the field of robotics to the level where you can create a replicant, where's all the other stuff that came along the way, right? All the special purpose robots. There aren't any. There are no robots that appear in this. They're not in the backgrounds. They're not walking dogs. They're not washing windows or building buildings. And I think that's fine, but I think they largely avoid competing on that front because there really aren't robots in this movie.
But there are AIs, and I think that, when, some scientists say we're as few as, 20 years away from artificial general intelligence that's greater than, human intelligence, I think that it was a wise choice to add the character of Joy, just to add that extra layer to say, okay, here's another way to look at the same question.
It's also most like the book. Like, in order, instead of having electric sheep, you have electric girlfriends.
Daniel, what do you think? Human level AI in 20 years sounds like bullshit to me.
Oh no, I'm with it. I think at least in limited domains, they're already tricking us, and they'll continue to trick us. I mean, what'll happen is we'll just keep corralling our wagons in tighter and tighter and saying, well, that's not real human level intelligence, just because it can do everything I do. And so, I think they're going to keep adding one ability at a time iteratively. I'm not saying there's going to be some friggin' singularity. I don't think that's going to happen. But they're going to keep getting more and more abilities stitched together until you finally go, well, all right, what's left? And I think that 20 years on that timeline is, in terms of having a conversation with an AI, I think we'll be able to get there.
I mean, but do you think that in 20 years there'll be AIs who are making a podcast as good as this one without a whole team of experts training them to do it?
No, David, no, buddy,
You're irreplaceable, David.
No.
How do we know you're not an AI already?
That's a good point. Yeah,
so
that's
David,
a good point.
We need to give you a void conf test.
The way to stay sane in the face of encroaching robot ability and skill level is to convince yourself that you're going to work with the robots. You're going to use these new podcasting tools to make the best podcast that anyone's ever heard before. But you're a crucial part of this. You're the meaty center of this whole equation. So, that's my feeling whenever people ask me, how are you going to feel whenever the robots can write your novels for you? I'll just be like, well, I had to write the first ones to seed the training algorithm. So technically I should get the royalties. That's my feeling.
All right. So, I think we're pretty much out of time. Does anyone have any final points? Anything you didn't get a chance to mention?
Well, I got a question. If we so how did Anna, Deckard's daughter, get the wooden horse, right? Because Deckard didn't, he said, I wasn't there. The part of the deal was I disappeared before my child was born. But so he's the one carving the wooden animals, right? And then so she has it. So clearly there was a transfer of it to her. And I was just wondering if anyone had any ideas how that happened.
Maybe he left it in her crib.
But it had the date of her birth.
And it had the residue from that place where he was hiding. I guess he could have been hiding there a long time.
Right. But either way, she would have grown up in a world knowing that it's a unique object. The way that all of the other kids wanted it. And, when they go to see the guy that, does date the wood, it's like, oh, well, this is valuable. So, if he did make it for her and somehow attach it to her or with her or put it with her caregivers.
Yeah.
Thank you. It would have, it would have survived. It would have been a unique enough object to survive at least to a point in which she was a little girl and it got, she had to hide it at which point it was lost.
Or maybe he's sentimental, with that flower. I really like that theory. And so he might be the sort of guy who shows up.
I think he was actually, one of my theories is, and I have to think about this a little more, but I think that he lied and he said, oh, I didn't see her, that was part of the deal that, I left before she was born. I think that he may have seen her for a while and left later when they put her in the orphanage, right? Because didn't she go into the orphanage when she was 8 years old?
Yeah.
So what happened before that? But anyway, that's for the forums.
Yeah. That's the thing with this movie is you can just keep talking about it forever, probably. But we can't because we're all out of time.
No.
So I just want to give a big thank you to Daniel H. Wilson, Sara Lynn Michener, and Matthew Kressel. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Daniel H. Wilson, Sara Lynn Michener, and Matthew Kressel for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank John Green for sponsoring today's show. Remember to check out the first 2 chapters of his new novel, Turtles All the Way Down, over at turtlesallthewaydownbook.com. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.